So I can say for myself, people say, oh, why do you say this? It makes you unpopular. But I was fortunate enough to have grown up in a community and with a culture and with a background where at the end of the day, truth was what most concerned me, not about being popular.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's special episode of Against All Odds. My name is Daniel Coker, your regular host, and our guest today needs no introduction. She's regularly seen on your TV screens. She also happens to be my niece, but she's not allowed to call me uncle.
Okay.
And she was a third guest on our podcast when we started about a year ago.
I find that, quite surreal. I didn't think it'd been that long.
Oh, wow. Anyway, our guest today is the person of Esther Krakue. Esther is a journalist, and like I said, she regularly appears on various TV programs where she's renowned for her forthright opinions, if I can put it that way. And your brand of black conservatism, you just kind of say it as it is. Yeah. Anyway, so once again, you're welcome to Against All Odds.
Thank you for having me, Uncle.
Great. Anyway, Esther, one of the reasons why I brought you back, apart from obviously the fact that you're one of our highest watched episodes, or your episode that we do is one of our highest watched ones, is that recently there was an article that was published about a Cambridge professor, an American actually, but he's a research fellow in Cambridge.
Okay.
A guy called Dr. Nathan Kofnas.
Mm-hmm.
And basically he published his views and said that, let me read it. It says, Nathan Kofnas, a college research fellow in the Faculty of Philosophy, published the online blog post on Monday in which he discussed how to build a better world by convincing others of his beliefs. Now, what are his beliefs? Mr. Kofnas this week claimed that if top education institutions were to judge applicants only on merit, then Harvard's faculty would contain no black professors, and that blacks would disappear from almost all high-profile positions. And then he goes on to also say that Mr. Kofnas concludes towards the end of his post that society should accept that talent is not distributed equally across various racial groups. So when race realism is accepted, our cultural values will change. A new equilibrium will arise. Okay. Now, Cambridge University have come out and basically said, look, they protect, or they basically support freedom of speech and all that. And there's a big demonstration this coming Thursday on the 29th of March against this professor outside the Faculty of Philosophy. I mean, Esther, what would you say to somebody who has this kind of mindset?
I mean, when you were explaining that, I thought a few things. I suspected he was American, and I suspected the only reason why he did this is because he's in the UK, and he wouldn't be lynched like he would in the US for saying what he's saying. And then I also thought, is this person, the saying, never attribute malice that which can be adequately explained by stupidity. And I thought, maybe he's both. Maybe he's both. He's just that stupid. But I don't think he should be completely written off, even though I do think he was intentionally incendiary in what he was saying, because I do think that there are some nuggets that merit discussion, particularly on the view of talent and how it's equally distributed. And if we live in a society where talent is equally distributed because all man is made equal, then why aren't we seeing equal distribution of race, gender, sexuality, whatever, in every single position in society? Now, obviously that's skewed because I never hear the anger towards the fact that over 90% of bin collectors or bricklayers are men, right? We're not complaining about equality there, but we're complaining about equality in the more visible kind of high profile fields, and I think so in that instance there is some merit there. But this type of person personally, I think he knew what he was doing, and I think he knew who his audience are. I don't actually think he's talking to the British public, just because it's not really in the style of how we communicate. We don't tend to. I mean, actually, having experienced Americans, I think British people are extremely polite. I think we are wordsmiths, and we are extremely courteous in the way that we communicate, even if it might not necessarily be in someone's favor or in the way that they think is particularly favorable to them. I mean, I suspect what he's addressing is kind of the rise of DEI, so diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly in the corporate classes. And I've come out and said, when I often get asked to, I don't know, do Good Morning Britain or Sky News and talk about race-based issues and diversity and equality and all of that, I tend to turn them down, actually. A lot of people don't know this, because I feel like these are conversations that you can't just squash in a 5 minutes end of program discussion. I think it's something that's lengthy. I think it's something that you should have the brightest minds to debate. I find that a lot of people that have been pushing these sorts of agenda in the name of equality, for instance, either are not well versed in social science data, or they're not very intelligent, and I don't tend to conclude this often, then they're just quite malicious. So they actually have bad intent, but they can get away with it by masquerading as something else. I mean, if you look at it sort of just on a principle basis, would you get eye surgery from someone that you knew was filling a quota, and that's how he got into his medicine course? No. I mean, it's if I was told, and American, I think it's American Airlines that are doing this, they're trying to increase diversity amongst their staff, particularly the pilots. And I thought, if I was flying to New York and I found out that my pilot became a pilot because of diversity, I'll walk to New York. Wait, no. I was like, no. Actually, I'll just disembark now and then take my chances. And that's not to say that someone who's of color can't be qualified. Of course not. But once you create a society where people are rewarded on anything other than merit, you justify suspicion, and you justify people saying, actually, you didn't get this role because you're good enough, you got it because of the color of your skin. And in many ways you almost incentivize reverse racism, even though all racism is just racism. And I think that's the fundamental issue, because we've not talked about actually how do we breed a class of people that are just as good. We've often fixated, and there are various reasons for this. I mean, I can go into detail, but we've often fixated on one kind of forward-facing professions. So, like I said, a bin cleaner doesn't get the same amount of respect as a banker. That's why they say, why are 90% of bankers white, straight men? We want to see more women of color, more this. But because we don't afford the same dignity to someone who's effectively doing the same thing by going out to work every day and feeding his family, and probably encouraging or fostering a strong family unit that could then breed the future bankers, future black bankers or doctors and all of that, because we don't afford that kind of respect in society, we overlook the foundational principles that we actually need to encourage and foster in these communities to actually see that progress. You'll never question why you'll see like a Jewish surgeon, right? Because I think certain communities that have high levels of scholastic attainment don't look at it purely from the lens, purely through the lens of skin color, or purely through the lens of background. They look at it through the lens of actual achievement. If your skill set cannot be questioned, that's true progress, not you getting somewhere because of the color of your skin. I mean, we will really start to see, and we're probably seeing backlash to this already, we'll start to see extreme backlash towards these sorts of initiatives when things that really matter are taken for granted. So, like I said, medicine, right? You don't want a subpar surgeon, but how are you going to say, actually, you shouldn't be there, not because of the color of your skin, but because you're not good enough? Someone will say that's racism. Or pilots, for instance. I'm pretty sure 90% of all aircraft accidents is due to pilot error. So are you now going to, and no matter what case you make for it, you can't say, they're still going to be safe and well trained. That is the fact. That is why there's so many redundancies in sort of the airline industry to prevent accidents. But if the vast majority of accidents are caused by pilot error, you cannot make the case that it will be just as safe, because it's mathematically implausible. And there are other sort of fields that we'll see similar backlash. In the army, for instance, the RAF had to pay 31 white males £5,000 in compensation because email leaks revealed that they were being discriminated against in the recruitment process. There were some pejorative language. Some of them called them useless white pilots and all of that. Meanwhile, the army has a staffing shortage. It's had a staffing shortage for the last 10 years. We've halved defense spending since the 1980s. Meanwhile, we're sending money to Ukraine and we're talking about the need to boost our defenses. These kinds of programs done by people that I can only assume, and being generous, are not very bright, are having a real world impact. And you're seeing this backlash for a reason. Now, of course, I don't know this man. This is Cambridge professor. I don't support him. I suspect he knew what he was doing. But there are real problems to talk about, and I think we can feel incentivized to ignore it because you see shock jocks like this. Like I often say, the same black people that will say, oh, they're not enough black people in this industry and stuff like that. How many of you greet the security man when you walk into a supermarket? We don't even have that reverence, that respect for the average working man, let alone the average working black man, let alone, the average person that's providing for their family. These are the things that are the foundation for the kind of communities that we actually want to build. And in media, for instance, I see it all the time, people that work in studios, they don't know the name of their makeup artist that have been doing their makeup for years. They don't know the name of the person who's cleaning, who probably looks like me. I mean, I know the names of most of the cleaners in the building that I work in, and I work in all sorts of buildings. I've heard people say management said don't talk to these people, right? It happens. We as a society forget, respecting your elders. We don't even have reverence for the average working person that is going day in and day out to try and provide for themselves and their families. How dare us talk about, oh, there are not enough black bankers? Your priorities are misaligned. So I think if we really want to have that conversation, I think that's where we need to start. We don't need to start from
So basically, if I hear you right, I mean, you're basically saying that, as a community, we need to bring something to the table, to justify our being there, and it shouldn't just be. I mean, you've got to bring something that's excellent, something that's of value, something that's at par with, regardless of the color of your skin. You
need to be good enough, because that's how you earn your seat at the table. And I think there's a mindset difference here. I mean, in the US, for instance, and this is just purely based on geography. It's such a vast country. Communities find it easier to self-isolate. So it's actually not uncommon in the US for you to have grown up in a community where all the people you know around you are either Mexican or black or whatever. And your actual interaction with people of different races and backgrounds can be quite stunted. Now, of course, you can say the urban centers are huge and that's where most ethnic minorities live and flourish. But that still doesn't negate the point. It's still a vast country. It's still a lot easier to geographically self-isolate as a community. That's not the case in London. In London, everybody knows a Turkish person and a Greek person, a Tunisian, all of that. So just based on pure geography, our relations with other groups and races is different. We have more exposure. I think that's probably why we're more receptive to race-based conversations, because and yes, we have a problem of self-isolating communities and communities that don't integrate properly and that foster, as a result, extremist views. Of course, we have those problems. But I also think as a society, we're more willing to discuss solutions, society-based or wider solutions for society at large. And I think that's something that is to our merit. I mean, I hosted a conference with my friend during kind of the whole BLM era. And he was a research fellow at, I think, the Henry Jackson Society, but he has a PhD, and he's a very intelligent man. And one of the people that I interviewed at this conference was a professor of York at York University. He's half Nigerian, half Polish. Such a random mix. The most random mix you'll ever. I mean, brilliant man. And I was just like, you need to explain how your parents met. You need to explain your parents' love story to me. I need to know where they found each other. But I was saying, what was. Look, I do think that two things. One, the kind of BLM era gave people a false sense of where we actually are. There were so many people that thought, businesses care and all of that. They're trying to boost their ethnic minority figures. They actually want to have a conversation. And then 2 years later, they're now saying, oh, it was just a fluke. And I'm like, why are you surprised? You were getting emails from ice cream companies saying congratulations. It was the way they were doing it was so shallow and obvious. Yeah. But also, I mean, I asked this guy, what do you think was missing from the national conversation that made BLM kind of catch on like a house on fire here in the UK? And he said, it was such a rare opportunity in that it sucked all the oxygen out of the room. So you had to, in one kind of fell swoop, the country had to talk about issues that face sort of black and ethnic minority people in this country, in the case of BLM black people. And that's a rare opportunity, because it's rare for our attention to be fixated on that one thing. Now, unfortunately, I don't think we did it justice, because particularly for black British people, because we ended up importing all sorts of tropes and ideas that are unique to the American way of life and to American society, and rooted in American history, which is not British history, and certainly not black British history. And there were all sorts of, things that came along with it. Like people in BLM were found to be money laundering, businesses used it as a way of getting some social cachet and all of that. But the point he made still stands. We had no choice. We had to focus on it, and we had to talk about it, which brings me back to my original point, which is the people that have led these conversations about progress and diversity and all of that are not very bright. I don't want to say that they're malicious, because I think you have to be extremely intelligent to be so sophisticated and that kind of to have such malicious intent. But to quote Trump, we're not sending our best. And our best usually are people that are courageous, that are not afraid to go against the grain, that are solutions focused as opposed to rhetoric and feelings focused. And unfortunately, we've had the latter rather than the former. So I can say for myself, people say, "Oh, why do you say this? It makes you unpopular." But I was fortunate enough to have grown up in a community and with a culture and with a background where, at the end of the day, truth was what most concerned me, not about being popular, because I didn't care. I didn't have any kind of qualms about my identity and all. I know I'm Ghanaian, I know I'm fancy. I know I've been fortunate enough to have grown up in a family where, people like you and my dad and my mum and all of that, educated, intelligent, kind, brilliant black people. I don't have to struggle to see that. And I've been fortunate enough to do that and to have that and to have grown up with that. But I can absolutely understand the argument that some people are not that fortunate. But again, I could argue the same way. Maybe you're not looking at the right things to value, right? Yes, you may not have grown up with black parents or relatives that are bankers or I don't know, really high profile careers. But if they're going to work every day and coming home and feeding you and instilling values in you that are evergreen and are making you a better person, you could even argue that sometimes that's better than having sort of high profile relatives in your family or being exposed to kind of high profile people of a certain ethnic minority. So our focus is completely out of whack. The people leading these conversations are completely just not au fait with what's going on. I mean, Keir Starmer, who you could argue has the charisma of a plank of wood, and I suspect that same criticism is perfectly valid with Rishi Sunak as well. This kind of Race Inequality Act that is actually not rooted in any fact, because what you actually see is that there are greater disparities, certainly within ethnic minority communities, but what you end up having is taking from one community to appease the other, and it's to the detriment of other communities. So for instance, this idea of trying to enshrine, I mean, I have to pull up the proposed legislation, but trying to enshrine kind of race equality across fields and all of that, well, then you're going to penalize, by default, Chinese and Indian British people, because they are the people that statistically have the highest levels of scholastic attainment. I mean, something that people don't know, actually, is the best performing students in schools in Britain are black West African girls. Now, to an extent, that data is skewed because there's so few of them, right? There are a lot more Chinese or Indian British students than or white British students than black British girls, female students of West African heritage. Fine. But that doesn't negate the point or the reasons why, right? They tend to grow up in two-parent homes. They tend to grow up in religious households. They tend to grow up in households that really value education and push for high levels of scholastic attainment. And these are actually the things that matter. But we're not having those conversations. I mean, most people don't even know that fact about sort of black West African girls. And it's a pity, because once you have those conversations, once you hammer home those points and really base your analysis in social data, social science data, then the conversation has to shift. Because then there's no reason for Keir Starmer to say the kinds of things that he does, because it's like, hold on, where are you getting these ideas from? What is it rooted in? Is it rooted in the reality of Britain? So, that's what I think. I mean, going back to this person, that's how I somehow think what he's saying is relevant to us, but in a kind of roundabout way.
Yeah, so it's one of the things that he also came up, or he did mention, was the fact that sort of black people are less likely to grow up in nuclear homes, both parents and all that, and that basically kind of makes them less qualified in a certain sense. But anyway, we're not going to go too much into that.
And I have to point out, he's talking about the US. I mean, look, it is a problem that, black homes do tend to have higher rates of fatherlessness, but the disparity is quite significant when you compare two different communities. So it's, I think, 30% higher sort of single mother households in black Caribbean communities than in black African communities. So even within sort of black British communities there are disparities, but of course I suspect he's talking about the US.
Yeah, I mean, so what he said specifically was that 70% of black children are born out of wedlock, compared with 30% of white and 31% of Asian children.
I think it's even higher.
Yeah.
I think it's actually 80%. I mean, assuming he's talking about the US,
yeah,
it's upwards of 80%. Marriages in the black communities in the US, the vast majority don't last after 5 years. I mean, there are all sorts of kind of well-known statistics around that. The rates of abortion of black children in major cities is dwarfs the rate of abortion of other children of other ethnic communities, particularly white and Hispanic. So I mean this is I understand what he's saying, but I suspect he's
it's a bit skewed.
He is skewed, and his statistics are definitely with reference to the US.
The US, okay. Right, so we kind of live in this environment where it's almost like the elephant in the room, right? Because it's such a sensitive topic. I mean, we currently have in a situation where a senior conservative politician has had a whip suspended, because of a statement that he made. And I don't know the basis of the statement, but
neither does he.
But we're kind of living in this environment where, and he's refused to apologize, and it's a political nightmare, I guess, for anyone who's in a position of leadership, because you're down if you do, you're down if you don't. And he's saying that if he apologizes, he's showing weakness, and he's maintaining his stance and all that. Anyway, so the point I'm trying to get to, what I'm trying to ask is, in the environment that we are now, is it safe, or is it better for people to hide their true views?
Oh, of course.
Or to be open about their views.
It's easier to hide your views, but it's because we reward inauthenticity. Because we don't like it when people tell us the truth, because we'll cancel them, or I mean, our politicians, and I know many of them, and it's worse up close, I'll say that. They're more scared of Twitter than they are of the voting public. They're more scared of becoming a meme on social media than backlash from the British public. In the case of Lee Anderson, I feel like a bit of background here is necessary, because he was on GB News when he made the comment about Sadiq Khan basically being controlled by Islamists in London and all of that, and obviously everyone was appalled, mainly because they were like, okay, where is your evidence for this? I mean, there are many accusations you can level at Sadiq Khan, ULEZ being one of them, and the dodgy way that he pushed that through, how you can argue that you're making the air
cleaner.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, the air will be cleaner, just pay me £12.50. I mean, just treating us like we're idiots, basically. There's so many accusations you can level at him. And by the way, I've met Sadiq Khan, and I think he's actually a talented politician. I think he's more polished than the likes of Suella Braverman, which is saying something, even though I disagree with him on the vast majority of things. And I actually think a lot of his measures, I mean, if I was a black person living in London, Sadiq Khan would be my worst enemy. And if I had black children in London, he would be my worst enemy number 1 and 2 and 3. But what he was saying, Lee Anderson and Suella Braverman were brought into the Conservative Party, or to kind of close to Rishi Sunak, to be his attack dogs, basically. Because Rishi Sunak is a suited and booted Goldman Sachs alumnus, who has really no appeal to, you can say anyone, but certainly not to kind of the average working class red wall voter. He is a very kind of public school boy, a bit socially awkward technocrat. He's the kind of person you want in politics, but in the background, because at least you can say he's not an idiot. This person's CV is stellar. I mean, if I had his money, I don't even know what he's doing in politics. If I had his money, you would never see me again. Oh my God, with my billionaire wife. But so basically he kind of used these two attack dogs to say the unsayable and to kind of virtue signal that the Tories haven't abandoned their kind of true conservative credentials and all of that, whilst implementing policy that goes against all reason to begin with, and then certainly conservative credentials. And then he had the rude awakening that actually these people don't have any sort of political instinct, and they just say things because they think they're unsayable when actually they're just stupid and sometimes malicious or rooted in deeply held prejudices or even racism, you could say that. And particularly in the case of Suella Braverman, who that kind of cohort of politicians you can blame on David Cameron, because back in 2010 when he was kind of encouraging or creating that new crop of politicians, they had this idea that because these politicians, the Priti Patels and the Rishi Sunaks and the Suella Braverman in particular, are of ethnic minorities backgrounds, they're more likely to have more moderate political views. They're not going to be shock jocks like kind of, a former white pig farmer from Staffordshire who's upset about Brexit or too many immigrants in the country or something like that. That's just a trope. But anyway, Rishi Sunak has learned the hard way that actually talent beats everything, and that you don't just bring people around you because they signal certain things to the or the right kind of the super right of your party. And that's what's happened with Lee Anderson. I mean, I even find the idea that this guy was supposed to be somehow the voice of the working class hilarious. And I get frustrated when I see these things because, again, they're not sending their best and they're not very intelligent, because there are actually legitimate conversations to be had about social integration. What does it mean to be British? What are British values? Why are these communities self-isolating? And now you're seeing extremism bubbling up from these sorts of communities, which is linked back to the fact that they didn't socially integrate. Whenever we have conversations about kind of black people and scholastic attainment and all of that, I get frustrated that it seems to be only a black people conversation. Everyone should care about this because we're all British. Yes, they're black British, but they're still British fundamentally. And we've now come to the point where only certain communities can care about certain issues, and that's why when you have the BLM thing happen, everyone's like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. Yeah, because we weren't encouraged to care. Because we weren't encouraged to care that, white working class boys are at the bottom of league tables when it comes to schooling, right? We weren't encouraged to care about the fact that every police force in this country has reported higher rates of anti-Semitic attacks. We're not encouraged to care about our fellow sort of Brit because we don't know what we are anymore. We're a balkanized mess, and we have untalented politicians going for the path of least resistance like Lee Anderson, making inflammatory statements that are not rooted in any reality, that are sucking the oxygen out of the room and distracting from the real issues that we face. Sadiq Khan uses similar tactics. He had the audacity to say that ULEZ was about racial justice because the people that suffer the most from polluted air in London are black people. How dare you? How dare you use black people and working class people, who are the people that are going to be most disproportionately affected by these ULEZ charges, to effectively justify what you're doing, which goes against all reason. But of course he has to plug a hole in London's finances. Yeah, exactly. But this is the thing, and so I mean the reality is, the difficulty is, how do you have the reasonable, sensible people with common sense that have actually thought out their positions? How do you put them at the front? How do you make them be the center of attention as opposed to the Lee Andersons? I mean, like even the Gaza vote, that fiasco that we had last week with all these politicians walking out and all of that. The fundamental issue which irked me is we don't vote on Australian tax policy. Why should we think that the ceremonial vote about Gaza is going to make any difference? Meanwhile, like they're homeless people in this country, and our politicians are angrier. They're more incensed about something that's happening in the Middle East than about the plight of British people, and that's what should have really annoyed people. I mean, I have no problem with talking about sort of foreign affairs and how they affect us. Of course, geopolitically, these are things, the Houthis in the Middle East and their actions, they're affecting trade routes, of course. But there's a difference between talk and action. And last week's fiasco was a giant exercise in virtue signaling that was backed by no action, and we're paying these people money. These people are costing us money to do these things. It's an insult.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. So back to so one of the main reasons why I brought you back was between the time we spoke and actually no, let me correct myself. So we've had the first black chancellor. Okay, of the Exchequer.
He didn't last very long.
Okay, and I don't know him personally, right? I don't know him personally, and he's probably a very competent person. I don't know, but the thing is, was he set up? Because the optics don't look good for people of color, right?
He set himself up. Oh, that one day he set himself up because he was too intelligent. I know him. I've seen him in studios and stuff like that. Kwesi Kwarteng probably has the second best CV in the Commons. He is easily overqualified to have anything to do with public service. I mean, again, Rishi Sunak and Kwesi Kwarteng have the best CVs in Parliament. There's no, and again, that's a testament to the fact that actually competence wins, not having to put people in positions because of the colour of their skin and filling out some arbitrary quotas. The problem with Kwesi Kwarteng is he aligned himself with an amateur. Liz Truss didn't have a good track record even before she became the darling of the Tory party. There was much to desire in terms of just bare competence, and she didn't have a communications kind of strategy and team around her that were experienced. I mean, I've seen 10 down, like I know people in 10 down if it's usually just graduates, like DOI, Starry-eyed graduates. These are not serious people. And all the serious people have left politics because they're being heckled out or they're being shouted or cancelled or whatever. So he aligned himself because, of course, it's his big opportunity. He just thought that I will never get an opportunity to be Chancellor again. Why not align myself with Liz Truss? But he also admitted, and he did an interview with Tom Newton-Dunn saying, he warned her. He said, be steady. You're going too fast. You're doing things. You're spooking the markets. You're saying all these things that are you're not backing up. And actually, in the grand scheme of things, their budget, their catastrophic budget, was actually quite inconsequential, just macroeconomically speaking. But it was the principles that it was rooted in that were shambolic, unconservative, too fast, too soon. To her credit, she recognized that the issue of anemic economic growth is going to come back to bite us. It already is. We have French-style welfare spending without the economic growth to back it up. Which is something that I actually say ethnic minorities should be most concerned about, because the pie that we're all slicing between us is getting smaller and smaller, and the people at the bottom of society are going to be worse off, and they tend to look like you and me, unfortunately. But in terms of him aligning himself to Liz Truss and the whole fiasco of his chancellorship, I think he set himself up to fail. Now I'm sure he's looking back and thinking, yeah, actually it's right, it seemed like my only opportunity, but I also should have looked at the merits of this character. It's the same thing with Boris. Anyone who aligned themselves to Boris was an established liar. Everybody knew this. Michael Gove was the only person in Parliament that always said, this man is not serious. This man is, he had his appeal as London mayor because he humanized the Conservative Party, but he is a pathological liar. And he doesn't have the strength of character to do what he does. And for years, Michael Gove was called the snake of Westminster. He still is. He's still seen as this kind of slimy character. But he was right. And actually, history has vindicated him for anybody that bothers to learn. And it's the same thing with Liz Truss. You have to look at, her track record. I think, yes, he would have had to wait a bit longer. But it would have paid off. And the wisdom, which we don't talk about these days anymore, the wisdom to actually sit back and take your time. Sometimes my dad says this to me, but it's true. The wisdom to take your time and to have to look at things from a kind of rational and broad perspective is what will save you. Kemi Badenoch, for instance, obviously she wanted to be leader, but she didn't tie herself to idiots. She didn't degrade herself. She didn't feel the need to rush and all of that because she was playing a long game. She will probably be the next leader of the Conservative Party. Probably. She's one of the most popular politicians. She's been very consistent. She's a testament to the fact that, again, competence wins, not the colour of your skin, not virtue signaling, not all of that. And that could have been Kwesi Kwarteng. It should have been Kwesi Kwarteng. How many people have his CV? I mean, for me, if I had his CV, I wouldn't enter politics for various reasons. It's an undignified undertaking now. Politicians are heckled in the streets. There's no respect for being a public servant. You're more scared of social media than you are scared of your voters. It doesn't pay enough. We are uncomfortable with the idea of paying our eye surgeons £5 an hour, but someone dictating tax policy that affects 67 million people, somehow that's fine. It's fine to pay them really a pittance. I mean, the Singaporeans pay their politicians, I think, upwards of $1 million, and they have bonus schemes. So if your policy has positive social effects, you get a bonus. That's how you incentivize, and I'm not saying it's perfect, of course not. But look at the adverse. You have American politicians, someone like Joe Biden, who's been in office in Congress since he was 28. The average salary for a congressman is around $150,000, and yet you have him, Bernie Sanders, Nancy Pelosi. They're worth tens, if not like hundreds of millions of dollars, and nobody can explain it. The maths is not mathsing.
Well, the thing is, if you're a politician, it's not you don't get rich from your salary, whatever it is. It's you cut deals.
Trading. Yeah, but it's immoral.
But that's just the way it is, and we know that. I know that's not how it should be.
But that's the appeal of Trump. I mean, this man is ludicrous. There's so many things you can level against Trump. It's not even funny. It's actually a sport. We'd sit here for 3 years just to go through what is wrong with Donald Trump.
Yeah.
But he was right. He was, Hillary Clinton said you evade taxes. Yeah. Because you and your friends have made it so. So do you and your friends. You're the ones that facilitate it. Why? I'm just smart. Like, should I pay more taxes? For what reason? Yeah. So my taxes can go on ridiculous government spending? It's not. And I have it really, really bothers me. Because now you only have two kinds of people that can enter politics. People that are very rich, that will make a difference in life. I'm pretty sure Rishi Sunak doesn't even take a salary, or he donates it to charity. Yeah. Or people that fit a certain mold, that are arguably not the best, that are not very well off, that have to have to be an MP, and so they will do whatever it takes and say the things that they need to say to keep their job, and I think that's pathetic. I mean, obviously they've reformed kind of the compensation package or the severance package for MPs, so now you get like 3 months salary or something like that. But that's still not enough. You want the best people in charge, but somehow we're uncomfortable with that because the best people might not look like, like Kwasi Kwarteng, for example. They might, but they might not. And then obviously I question how the simple mindset of someone must look like me to adequately represent or accurately represent my views. For me, I find that insulting. I often say that I probably have more in common with a white working class man from Leeds than I do with a black American. Just because I just think value, culture, language, just completely different. I would struggle to connect with the kind of a traditional sort of black American person in a way that I would connect with a white person from up north, because there's so many things that are different about us. Like, I would never use the N-word. I think it's grotesque. I think it's degrading. It has no link to my own history. I don't see everything through the lens of race. I'm first and foremost absolutely a believer in good values, in the family unit, in competence and discipline. And I don't think that's something that's a conversation that's really been fostered in the black American community. Now, you could say that's a simplistic argument, but you only have to look at the results and the output to be able to make that judgment. What kind of people are venerated in black American communities? How many 5 black Warren Buffetts can you name? I can't even name one. You're either an entertainment or a sportsman or Nick Cannon breeding like a cockroach. Like, it's just it's sad for me to see, because I don't struggle to see people like I can name like 5 black and African entrepreneurs right now, Dangote and all these people, right? And it's obviously not as plentiful, but again, it's a fundamental mindset shift. It's completely different.
Election year, right? It's looking like it might shift the way of the Labour Party simply by virtue of COVID, a lot of bad press, lots of leadership changes. It's almost like a default shift, rather than something that's based on true change or true some sort of seismic impact that the Labour Party would bring in. But then, would you say this is something that has been self-created, or could this have been avoided?
In many ways, no, because politics is cyclical. I think once you've been in power for 14 years, the momentum will just move against you, and then couple that with the Tories' disastrous records. Theresa May couldn't make a decision on Brexit to save her life. Boris Johnson was a dumpster fire. Liz Truss was a lettuce. there were more resignations. There were more resignations and sex scandals in Parliament than actual meaningful policy or progress on energy, for instance. We're in a cost of living crisis. A lot of bad decisions from 15 to 20 years ago are catching up with us. The UK has one of the highest energy costs in the developed world, and that's really saying something, because I think that underpins a lot of struggles that businesses have, and it affects a lot of investment. It affects a lot of social progress. I mean, it's just a mess. I mean, I feel like potholes are the accurate representation of Britain's decline. In many ways. I mean, high levels of immigration, lack of social integration, a crumbling asylum system that's really effectively now the laughing stock of the world. There's so many things that are wrong with this country. So in many ways, the Tories couldn't avoid it. And I've said this from even like 6 months after Boris became Prime Minister, the Tories are in damage control mode. So I could see the writing on the wall. Ultimately, yes, the Labour Party will likely win a majority at the next general election. They'll win a slim majority because I think, much to their chagrin, the numbers, particularly in Scotland, are not adding up. The SNP, much of a failure party that it is still holding on, because it's not about policies, it's about being a bulwark against English imperialism. And we have the likes of Tony Blair to thank for that, for sowing the seeds of discord amongst other countries in the UK, Northern Ireland as well. Yeah, you're right. You know, Keir Starmer isn't leading in the polls because there's been a sudden enthusiasm for Keir Starmer. He has as much charisma as a tapeworm. And, you know, it's not hard to see. Now, you could say I'm tired of charismatic politicians. I just want honest people. But you can't get away from the fact that you need charismatic politicians. You need, you know, good communicators and effective leaders. Most people remember Blair and Obama more for their style and for their ability to hold a room than for the things that they actually did. If people remember actually what Obama used to do, they would think Trump is like the second incoming. He deported more people than anyone in history, right? Like Obama's track record, particularly on foreign policy, is probably as right as you can get. Anyway, well, not right, but certainly not as milquetoast libertarian as he's painted out to be. So yeah, Keir Starmer will win. He will win a slight majority. I hope it's a bigger majority, because I actually want to see the destruction of the Tory party, because you must die to be reborn. And I think that's what the Tories need. Keir Starmer's 5 years in office will be painful and largely inconsequential, I think. I think he will relent on certain things that he's talking about. I mean, at the moment, he's already not kind of even committing to certain things. We don't even know where he stands on most issues. His VAT on the school thing, he'll scrap it. He'll probably keep the Rwanda policy. I think the only thing he'll backtrack on is one thing. So you don't get 5 things, you get one thing from him. It's like Tony Blair. Tony Blair was basically like a poor man's conservative, but he kind of threw a bone to like red like Labour voters, kind of middle class Labour voters, by banning fox hunting, for instance, something that's largely inconsequential and quite moronic. The Tories, I don't really see the future for the Tory party. The biggest issue I see with the Tory party is talent. They're just not recruited. They have no appeal. Why would you want to be a conservative politician? For what reason? Why would you want to be a politician to start with? But then why would you want to attach yourself to this dumpster fire? It doesn't make sense. But I also think in that it provides an opportunity for a more sensible cohort to come out and say, look, we've made mistakes. We've not... I mean, one of the biggest things that concerns me is obviously energy and energy infrastructure. We've not thought about that at all. That underpins a lot of our infrastructure investment, all of that. So, you know, I can only hope that you'll see some sensible people rise from the middle. But I've met some Labour MPs, I've done shows with some Labour MPs that I think, okay, they're not entirely insane. I think they play the same virtue signalling game as the Tories. They just haven't been the incumbents, so they haven't had the kind of spotlight on them. It will come, and it will probably be more brutal. It will be more intense. I think the reason why Keir Starmer will win by a slim majority is because even though the Tories haven't given their base a reason to vote for them, the state that the country is in, it would be so painful for them to feel like they were handing the Labour Party a victory. They know they're still going to lose, the Tories, but they will at least feel like a modicum of duty to still vote and still do something to soften the blow. But again, I also think a lot of Keir Starmer's wiggle room will be dictated by what happens geopolitically. So assuming we don't enter World War III, which is, you know, if we had to go there, I have a few people that I think will get us there very quickly. Anyway, it depends on the Americans. It depends on, I mean, I think we're going to have an election just a month before the Americans, so sometime in October. If Trump wins, the landscape changes.
The whole landscape changes.
And so even if Keir Starmer wanted to play high and mighty and go for the things that he does, Trump will say, listen, things are bad. They're only going to get worse unless you play ball. It is time for a bilateral trade agreement. It is time for you to align yourself more openly with the American sort of axis of influence. I've said this from the beginning. My main opposition to support for Brexit was because I didn't see a future with the EU. I think the EU is not an economically dynamic trading bloc. I don't even think you can have an economically dynamic trading bloc. I think that's a paradox. But you know, once Germany falls, everything is falls. I mean, Germany has been forced to kind of restructure its entire energy and production industry because they no longer have Russian gas to fall back on, which form the basis of not just energy but a lot of sort of petrochemicals that they produce and really kind of the industrial heartlands in Germany. So you know, the writing's on the wall for the EU. It has been for a while. If the economics don't tip it over, certainly the social issues will. Immigration is still a big issue. So yeah, I mean, it's going to be, but again, in 5 years, this country will be fundamentally different. You know, we're talking about 1.2 million people coming net over the last couple of years. No one's asking who's leaving. And I think that's, for me, what's more concerning. You're having these, in many ways, 40% of whom are dependents, so women and children. So they're people that are already draining from the system. The vast majority of these migrants, and I think I calculated, well, estimates say if you don't earn over £35,000, you're a net taker from the state. Actually, the real figure should probably be around double that, so £60,000. The vast majority of these immigrants coming in are not on £60,000. So they're fundamentally changing not only the face of Britain, but also our economic situation. And I suspect the people that are leaving are probably the middle class that can get better jobs in Australia or Canada.
And Dubai.
Dubai, buy houses, not have to pay taxes. I mean, some of my own friends are leaving. I've often said, and this is not popular, I'm going to save myself. If I get a job somewhere else that pays me 3 times here and I don't have to be forking out as much money as I do in taxes, I'm gone. Because why should I martyr myself for a country that doesn't even know what it is? I mean, look at how, when they were talking about, you know, you'll have to conscript people to even fight for the British Army, and there was all this furore, like, you know, what am I fighting for? Young people in this country have legitimate grievances. What are we fighting for? This is a balkanized mess. We don't even know what it means to be British. We're never going to get a state pension. Fine. We can't buy our houses. Fine. We can't start families as a result. We don't know what values underpin our society. I mean, it just gets from bad to worse no matter how you look at it. We're being taxed within an inch of our lives. You can get a better deal somewhere. Even if one of those things is better somewhere else, fine, I'll take it.
Yeah. Final question. What do you think we can do to improve the proportion of black voters who participate in elections?
Have black leaders that they can connect to. And it's a criticism that I've leveled at both parties, because we haven't really made the case for why black people should care about economic growth. We haven't really made the case for why black people should care about energy policy, or the fact that 17% of England's population are in social housing. Why are we subsidizing a fifth of the population to live in social housing? We haven't really made that case. You could argue that it's usually black people that are beneficiaries of this, but that's not forward thinking. Don't you want your son to be the next, governor of the Bank of England? I think you should abolish the Bank of England, but that's a different conversation. But don't you want people that look like you to be in positions just because they're that good? Again, I understand why it's a fixation of many people. Not for me, because I have grown up around successful black people. But I get it. I understand why. It's like, God, when is it our time? I totally understand that. But we have to have leaders in the community that are, 1, courageous, that are 2, not afraid to say things that are not popular, that are 3, ready to call out behaviors within our own communities that are counterproductive and unhelpful. Have respect for your average man. Have respect for the average cleaner and, security man. Greet people. Show people that they have dignity just by existing. And then it's a different conversation. So, ultimately it starts with leadership. Having people that are willing to educate, and
connect with the ordinary man.
Exactly. Yeah.
Good. Well, Esther, thank you very much. As always on this podcast, we give our guests the opportunity to dedicate their episodes to anyone or any group of people of their choice. So who would you like to dedicate this podcast to?
Oh wow!
I don't think you had that the last time.
I
right?
didn't have that the last time.
Oh,
What would
wow.
I like to dedicate?
Those are our early days, right?
Yeah. I would like to dedicate this podcast to carers, actually, because I think they're kind of the unsung heroes of British society. We do have an aging population, and I think again this is another thing that the government has failed on. We haven't really had the foresight to think of what happens to old age care and how to best support communities to support each other. And I think the kind of roles that carers play in society are very vital. I mean, I had a short stint as a carer when I was kind of transitioning into media, which my parents still don't know. But I have so much support, respect for them and what they do. And you really have to have you don't have to care. And I don't think we've done them justice. We've imported tens of thousands of carers on £20,000 a year contracts to do jobs that are worth a lot more, and then we have the audacity to say British people don't want to do them. Why should they do them for £10 an hour?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think carers.
Fantastic. Esther, thank you once again for coming, and I'd also like to say a very big thank you to our sponsors, Alexander Ash Consulting and Consulting Professionals, for making this episode possible.
Thank you.
If you've enjoyed this episode, I'd like to like, comment, share, and subscribe to help us build a bigger and a better platform. Because the bigger the platform gets, the bigger the guests get. Thank you very much, Esther.
Thank you. Thank you, Uncle.
Cool. Oh.